Thanks to all of you for being here in your state capitol today. The mere fact that you are here listening to the leaders in the legislative branch and ultimately the executive branch of government shows your commitment to moving Mississippi forward and improving upon what is already a great place to raise a family. As we traveled around in the 2011 campaign, the thing that we heard repeatedly over and over from people all across Mississippi is that our number one priority needs to be and must be job creation, bring better and higher paying jobs to Mississippi. And as once I was sworn in as Lieutenant Governor, what I've tried to do as bills come across my desk, and by the way, there's about 3,000 of them that were filed last year that came across my desk, is look at each and every one of them and see if they meet that criteria. Does this piece of legislation, is it going to help us create an environment which encourages you in the private sector to invest capital and create jobs in our state? Because while I believe that job creation must be our number one priority, I also have a political view and a political philosophy which says government does not create jobs. Government simply creates the environment which encourages the private sector to invest capital and create jobs. And that's the criteria that we've tried to apply to each and every piece of legislation that comes before the legislature. And I think as you look at the results from the session last year and what I hope is some strong movement this legislative session, the results speak for themselves. Last year we were fortunate, working with our friends in the House and the governor, we were fortunate to eliminate the inventory tax on Mississippi businesses, something that has made us non-competitive as a state. It's made us non-competitive if we were going out and trying to recruit new business and industry into Mississippi, but it also made us non-competitive or made our businesses non-competitive because if you lived in Meridian and were competing with an entity that lived just across the state line in Alabama and you had to pay that inventory tax and they did not, that was made you less competitive. The same could be said all across our state. So for years and years that had been discussed in the legislature. Last year we were actually able to do it. We also passed legislation last year that had broad support from the business community to revamp our workers' compensation system in Mississippi. I view workers' comp as simply a cost of doing business for many employers, and through the original intent of our workers' comp laws over 50 years ago when they passed were to ensure a level playing field between the employer and the employee. Because of some administrative court actions over the last 15 to 20 years, that had become no longer the case. And so we were able to reform our system last year to ensure that every employee that deserves and needs access to the system, that they have it, but to remove some undue burdens and undue cost on our employers, thus lowering their cost of doing business. I also am a conservative Republican who believes that intrinsic within our job creation efforts, we must improve the educational attainment level of our citizens. During the 2012 session last year, we took the initial steps and made some significant progress. Blake mentioned the A, B, C, D, and F bill. What we found as we were looking at our educational system, we got an awful lot of teachers and an awful lot of administrators that are doing fantastic work. And I commend every single one of them for doing that. But we've always got to ask, and we always got to expect more and raise the level of expectations. With that ABCDF legislation, I'm convinced it's going to have the same effect in Mississippi as it did in Florida, as it did in Louisiana. In Florida, the first year after Governor Bush was elected and passed through the legislature that legislation in 1999, they had roughly 650 schools that were rated A and B. They had roughly in 1999 650 schools that were rated D and F. 12 years later, after having raised the bar 6 times to be an A or B school, 12 years later, and in the most recent rankings, they had 2,150 schools that were rated A and B and they had less than 150 that were rated D and F. In the state of Louisiana, they just passed a simplification of their process and going to A, B, C, D, and F 3 years ago. The number of D and F schools in the state of Louisiana has been decreased by 40% in that short period of time. You see, when parents and grandparents can understand what's going on in their local schools, if they're not meeting expectations, parents and grandparents demand results. And I was happy to see, not long after the rankings came out in our state, back in September, you saw the mayor of the city of Canton and the mayor of the city of Moss Point call town hall meetings to discuss their community's results and to ask the question and to have a discussion about what they as a community can do better to improve their educational system. I think that in and of itself is progress, but I am convinced that if we raise the level of expectations on our administrators, on our teachers, on our parents, and most importantly, on our students, that Mississippians will rise up and meet those increased expectations. And that's what we're trying to do in the legislature, and that's why we are working so hard to work with our State Department of Education, Dr. House, who's doing a phenomenal job at the department, all of the board members. We're all working towards the same common goal. For years and years and years, people in this building have talked about school district consolidation. Last year, we actually did school district consolidation in 2 counties in our state. In Bolivar and Sunflower County, we reduced the number of districts by 5. By the way, Bolivar County, a great county, had 6,700 students and 6 school districts. The reduction of 5 school districts in those 2 counties will save over $3 million in administrative cost that can either be reinvested in the classroom, because the one thing we know for sure is that every child that has the best way for every child to get a quality education is to have a quality teacher in every classroom. So those 2 schools could reinvest that money in the classroom, or at the local level they could choose to return it back to the taxpayers. We've got a lot of additional things that we need to do in terms of education reform. One of the items that has probably received the most amount of press is that of public charter schools. A bill passed the Senate last year to allow for public charter schools. We were not successful in getting it passed through the House, but we're going to work very hard this year. Here is my personal opinion. I believe, first of all, that public charter schools are not a panacea. They're not going to change or solve all of our education woes overnight. In fact, they are going to give parents and kids a choice in their education. All too often here in our state, we get focused on school districts or school zones or this or that. We're too focused on the system of education and not nearly focused enough on what's most important, and that is what's best for kids. And so in our efforts to continue the education reform, we're going to continue to push for public charter schools as an additional tool in the toolbox. There's going to be a couple of contentious points, as there always is in legislation. You know, I tell people all the time, when the press particularly asks if this bill is going to pass or that's going to pass, and if or why not, the way in which our founding fathers designed our system, it's supposed to be hard to pass legislation. And so as we look at the various items and issues that exist surrounding public charter schools, one of the items that will be discussed is, in what school zones should we allow them? I believe in the laws of supply and demand. I believe we ought to allow public charter schools anywhere in our state. Because to my friends who are in the education establishment that say, well, we don't need public charter schools here because the schools are good, my view is this. I don't think that decision ought to be made by Phil Bryant or by Tate Reeves or by the Mississippi legislature. I think those who say we need schools only in those places where they're needed most, I agree with that. I just think the parents ought to be able to decide where there is demand for public charter schools. Did you know that there are more kids trapped in failing public schools in C districts than there are in F districts? Let me say that again. There are more kids trapped in failing public schools in C school districts than there are in F school districts. Let's allow the parents the opportunity to decide what's best for their kids. And we passed a strong bill out of the Senate last year. We're going to work very hard to do that and work with our friends in the House to ensure that we get meaningful education reform. But let me be clear. We already have a bad charter school law on the books in Mississippi. We don't need another bad charter school law. And that's what we'll be fighting for this year. In addition to that, we're going to continue to invest in our public education system. Last year, total expenditures in the state increased by $18 million year over year. Less than 0.4% growth in all of government. Less than 0.4%. Less than $18 million total growth. We invested over $30 million additional dollars year over year in K through 12 education. We invested $6 million additional dollars in community colleges. And we held the line on our institutions of higher learning, and virtually every other state agency took budget cuts last year. Because we want the message to be, we believe that the way to improve economic activity, and again, that's where I started my discussion today, is job creation, is to improve and increase the educational attainment level of our citizens. I want to thank all of y'all for being here today, giving me the opportunity to address you on some of these items that we feel are going to be very important, along with many others during this legislative session. Thank you for the opportunity for giving me the opportunity to serve as our state's Lieutenant Governor and work with people in this building who, on both sides of the building and on both sides of the aisle, are well-intentioned and are looking to work together to pass good, solid, conservative legislation that helps move Mississippi forward. Thank y'all.